Hey, welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. It's a rainy Sunday afternoon, and I'm chasing the threads on a couple of the U-bolts for the 71 Nova rear suspension. I wish I had a deep socket in 26mm. I'd be gunning these off and on with a little bit of lube. Instead, I do it by hand or with this genuine Freight from the Harbor wrench. It's actually a pretty nice wrench. I don't use 26mm very often, but today it's coming in handy. Kind of a slow process, so I got myself a chair, turned on the TV, and it's really all I felt like doing this afternoon. But that's okay. Each piece has to be done along the way. I came out to the shop early this morning and messed around with the U-bolts and shims and pinion angle, hoping there was a way that I wouldn't have to cut it all apart, but there isn't. So now I'm going to disassemble the rear housing, take the axles and brakes out, take the pig out. I'm converting to multi-leaves, and I'll explain why when I get them out. Still going to run the Caltrax. So I'm going to disassemble, catch you in a few. I put a stand under the front so it doesn't get nose heavy on the lift when I pull out the rear end. Just a good precaution. It all looks brand new because it is. I had installed this 350, I believe it has a track lock, positive traction, and it has a long Ford yoke, and I'm going to put in one of my aftermarket 3 1/4 bearing housings with a Detroit locker and a billet yoke. I have enough of them, I might as well put a good one in this one because it is a 4-speed car. These axles are okay, but I'll never buy them again. They're from the Big Parts Warehouse, no name. You can probably guess the brand. There's a spacer that goes between the axle bearing and the axle itself, right there. It came with the spacer, but it wasn't cut to any dimension. 9-inch Ford either has a 2.36 brake offset or 2.5. I called tech support, asked which one it was cut for. If it was cut for 2.5, simple math, I could cut it down because I needed 2.36. Nobody knew, nobody could answer. You're totally on your own. I don't know how other people install these without knowing that. So I did some high-tech, highly classified mathematician type stuff, and I did get it on the first try, because when you press this on, you're not getting it back off without wrecking it. So, and my offset's correct. I say the multiple bolt pattern. They'll function just fine in the street car, but I'll never buy them again. For another $80 to $100, you can get name brand stuff with actual tech support. That pretty much applies always. One day I grabbed this slide hammer and I put the handle on backwards, the hammer part, and my meat of my hand was hanging out, ended up in between there. You never do that twice. Roaming around on my pedal bike when I was a kid, anytime I saw a hot car, I had to get down on the ground and see what it had for a differential because I was already an expert at spotting them in the field. You got a 9-inch Ford if you have to use a wrench on these bottom 2 bolts. And the 12-bolt Chevy is easy because you'll see the 2 bolts at the bottom. No other differential GM made has them hanging down the bottom. Typically, you look underneath, that's all you can see hanging on the fuel tank. 2 bolts. I installed this 350 track lock because it was nice and mild. This was going to be just a mild LS, a 4L80E, 350 geared pig with a track lock. Just going to be a cruiser. So I didn't add jacking bolts, and I did a super nice job siliconing it in. I swear right now you could probably wind it up and pop the clutch and it would still stay in there with no bolts. Excuse me, no nuts on it. I'll get her out of there, but adding jacking bolts so you can thread a bolt in here that pushes on the housing to push the pig away from the housing is an awesome idea. It put up a good fight, but with enough blows of my purse, I managed to knock it out of there. If the U-bolts were still on the rear end, I could have just jacked on the yoke with the transmission jack and probably popped it out of there, but that thin little bead of silicone sure is strong. The beauty of stripping the rear end in the car is now I can just lift the housing out by hand. Out on the bench, I'm going to have to cut off the Monolith spring brackets. First gen Camaro, third gen Nova had a piece of rubber that went around the spring, and the Monolith, there's no locator on the top. One of the reasons why I'm changing the Monoliths to multi, because I have multi, and two, if you had a multi-leaf car, this is thicker in here because the shock plate sandwiches this rubber piece, and there's just T-bolts that go through here, and they never had U-bolts, or if they did, they had T-bolts on one side and one U-bolt. I've seen them both ways. If somebody added slapper bars, which this had the shock plate was gone, it had slapper bars on it, which led to the pinion angle I chose originally, almost 5 degrees. And then I tried, when I went to the Caltrax instead, they only need 1.5 or 2 at the most. So I welded a locator on top of the Monolith, probably should weld to a spring, and I put a wedge shim in there, but I never liked it because then it makes a gap on the hair. And long story short, I'm going to torch them off. And I did a super good job. I welded inside and out, and the circle here. So they're going to come off kind of hard. Because, like I said, with original T-bolts, 4 T-bolts, there are no U-bolts. This attachment to this is really important because that's what holds it on. It holds it in. No security of the U-bolt going around the tube. With the U-bolts, this plate can just sit here. And as a matter of fact, on big trucks with leaf springs, dump trucks and stuff, the upper saddle just sits there, and the U-bolt sandwiches it in. Then it's not actually welded to the housing. But the top of the rear end in a dump truck is also flat. So, of course, I will be welding these on. This is the factory squirmy arrangement. These are actually aftermarket poly. They're even nicer than the factory ones that just rubber. I'm going to go with the genuine Mopar weld-on saddle, which I was hoping it was a little thicker to give me more ride height, but it's going to end up about the same, I guess. Because the higher the axle tube goes in the car, the lower it might go. Because I don't want to gain any ride height. I'm happy with the ride height of the Monolith spring, but I believe the multi-leaf is going to ride the same. I'm using the multi-leaf because I have them. Again, because the Monoliths don't have the locator for that. This sits on top of the spring, you need a locator. This is my original Monolith locator on the bottom of the spring. It would center on the shock bracket, and again it would just sit on top, the bracket that I showed you, and the T-bolts would hold it. I added this piece when I was trying to secure the wedge. It's a tubular piece. I welded the center, but probably shouldn't weld to a spring. I did just to try it. I've never driven it that way. And here I am changing it because I don't like it. That and the body dust is everywhere. The Caltrax have an aluminum bushing that I'll have to press out. I pressed into this spring. I'll have to press it out and press it in the multi-leaf spring. The rest will transfer over. If you're really serious about drag racing with leaf springs, they also sell a rear slider to replace the shackle, but in my case, I'm just going to put the shackles back on. They're all brand new. This Super Duty housing was a NASCAR Grand National full floating, so it had threaded adapters on the end and full floating axles. When I cut those off, the housing was actually too short then, so you can see I added on a piece on both sides. So instead of narrowing it, I was widening it. It was an awesome gift from my brother, and I'm going to put it to good use. I'm going to run this brand new Ford Motorsport 9-inch 3.25 Baron case with this red high temp coating on it. Came from DEI, I believe. You can see where the cooler port was that I plugged. That's Ford Motorsport. That's G-Force, I believe, billet yoke. It's a 360 gear, 31 spline Detroit locker. Should be a good choice. A friend of mine hauls truckloads of this stuff up from North Carolina. I bought all the parts and put it together last summer. I believe I did a video on it. This is an example of the jack and bolt I was wishing I had. And I'll still probably install that red differential without it because I don't plan on changing it very often. But super handy if you do. There's one on both corners or opposite sides. If I hadn't already bolted in this housing, I would run this. It's offshore casting. It's 350 gear, 31 spline Detroit locker. Still has a billet. Bearing support, billet yoke, but it's actually a 306 case, and I bought special bearings to put the 325 Detroit locker in it. But this rear end will go in a street rod or something, so it'll still be a good choice. It's a little bit too narrow for the Nova. I would have welded in the whole thing. But it's about 1.5 inches too narrow. I decided to jump back over onto the 71 Nova because in a week or so I'm going to need the lift to do some spring maintenance on a couple other vehicles. Plus, I'm almost done underneath. I'll be able to remove it from the lift, bring it over here where the Model A is sitting, maybe on an angle, so I can open the doors and work on the interior. And I'll move the Model A over, maybe that'll jumpstart that project again. So I will probably end this video here. It's getting kind of long. And when I get the brackets cut off and if something fun happens, I need to mock the rear end in the car, set the pinion angle, the correct dimension this time. Again, plans change. I was going to run slapper bars with a standard transmission. I gave it like 5 degrees down, which is normal. Caltrax, you don't need that, and then everything led to what I've probably explained 3 times already. So that's going to do it for this one. Next video, it'll be going back together. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.